Happy Thursday, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today, Easing Compliance Headaches, How to Stop End-User Mistakes from Causing Non-Compliance. Frankly, gives me a headache just thinking about the potential of non-compliance. So I'm Kayla Kirkaby, Vice President of Marketing here at Dizzion. So pleased to have all of you joining us here today. Want to get things started with just a few reminders for you all. You are going to be muted today, and we do have the option to collect your questions and field those at the end of today's webinar. So encourage you at any time as you've got them to log them and submit on the audience panel on the right-hand side of your screen through GoToWebinar. Also wanted to let you know that a recording of this webinar will be made available after the fact. So if you've got perhaps colleagues or peers of yours who weren't able to attend, or you want to take notes or get the deck afterwards, we will be making that available. So let's go ahead and get started and dive in. Okay, so we'll get started by talking a little bit about why compliance and some of the common compliance concerns and standards, how end users really factor into maintaining a really strong compliance posture and ensuring that you've got end user security as well. And then we'll dive into some ideal use cases and wrap up by featuring a Dizzion customer, Granada Corporation, who has really differentiated their business on the basis of security and compliance. We've got Felix Serrano joining us, who's the CEO of Granada, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have him on board today. So he'll be able to provide a little bit more detail on how they're delivering compliance services to their end user customers. And as I mentioned, we'll provide some time at the end for Q&A as well. Today we've got, as I mentioned, Felix Serrano, CEO of Granada Corporation and a Dizzion customer. We've also got Brady Random, VP of Product Strategy and Sales Engineering here at Dizzion. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here, and welcome. Brady has spent more than 2 decades within the IT infrastructure space, and here at Dizzion he spearheads a lot of product innovation for our team, and that includes our path to offering PCI and HIPAA high-tech compliant cloud desktops, which is something that we added to our solution suite late last year. Throughout Brady's career, he's really specialized at designing highly customized and fully managed IT infrastructure environments, doing those in a way that's obviously capable of delivering high performance and high availability. Brady, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Kayla.
We also have Felix Serrano joining us, CEO of Granada, and again, really proud to have Granada within the Dizzion customer base. Granada is a business process outsourcer, for those of you who may not be aware, and they specialize in providing both English and multi-language customer care support for many of the world's leading brands across a variety of industry verticals. Felix has been in the global operations, solutions engineering, and partner management space for more than 20 years, and he's really recognized as a leader within the space. For those of you who know him or have worked with him, you know that he really excels at what he does. Granada, just for a little bit of a background, has been in business for 8 or 9 years. And again, they really differentiate on the basis of multilingual services. They work with some highly regulated industries like financial services, insurance, and others, and they operate solely on a remote working environment, which means that their agents bring their own devices. So a lot of really unique attributes about Granada that make them well positioned to be really agile in a space that is increasingly competitive. So Felix, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and couldn't be more thrilled to have you on today.
Thank you.
Okay, Brady, for those of you that know Brady on the line, you know that he really likes cartoons, and we picked this one specifically for him. So I'll toss it over to you, Brady, to go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Kayla. I appreciate the introduction as well. I love this cartoon. It's fantastic. I think that there's a propensity of people that throw, or companies I should say, that throw technology at things, and they kind of don't necessarily think about how the end user can make mistakes, but yet they're trying to protect against those end users making mistakes. The other thing that we see a lot when we talk to different companies is that usually when it comes to compliance or it comes to security, there's kind of one person that's looked at for that security or for that compliance. And typically that person has another job. It's not just their sole focus. They might be a network administrator, they might be a sysadmin, they might be an applications administrator, something of that sort. So compliance or security isn't necessarily their first job. If it is their first job, a lot of times they're not given the tools or the leeway within the company to actually create change. And so what happens is we end up with this kind of compliant, kind of secure stature within the company. And so not looking at it holistically from the end user all the way through the applications, through the processes, the procedures, and the education of it, you end up with kind of a net with some really big holes in it. And that's what we're seeing a whole lot of. And if we move to the next slide. This is no surprise whatsoever. I think if we look at the landscape, and if you were to go back to 2015, 2015 was the largest breach record year ever, and 2014 was the biggest year before that, and it's not getting any smaller, and they're not going down. Now, the types of breaches and the types of attacks and those types of things might be shifting a little bit. You know, we had ransomware, for instance, that's made a big jump recently, but quite honestly, the bad guys are getting better. Security is getting better too, but security is almost reactive to it, and compliance tries to help put some framework around security as well. The one thing that is changing and is continuing to grow even exponentially from breaches is really the fines. When you look at things like HIPAA violations, for instance, there's a huge growth in HIPAA violations, or at least the fines against HIPAA violations as well. And when you have self-funded fine divisions of the government, quite honestly, then they're going to look for ways to give you fines versus, you know, saying, geez, you know what, this doesn't need a fine, or this can be a corrective action, etc. The real bottom line of it all is that the fines and the breaches are having more business impact today than they are ever before. And, you know, to the tune of putting businesses out of business, to making them change their business models, to making them change their customer acquisition strategies. It's really having a broad impact on businesses today. So when we looked at doing compliance, we looked at, you know, what are the kind of the broadest pieces of compliance and what has the most effect and where is the most reach on compliance. And so we picked both PCI and HIPAA. The other reasons that we picked PCI and HIPAA is because if you look at compliance, there is, I call it an acronym alphabet soup. So whether it's FISMA or NIST or FERPA or FFIEC, there is just an absolute crazy soup, quite honestly, of acronyms and different types of compliance standards out there. When you combine PCI and HIPAA, you end up reaching high 80s, low 90% of most pieces that are in compliance pieces or compliance regulations. And really, when you look at PCI and HIPAA, one of them is a governmental control, where another one of them is really private sector. So PCI being private sector, it's a little bit more subscriptive, or prescriptive, excuse me. And when you look at HIPAA, it's kind of up to the end user, and that's why we've seen additional compliance pieces like HITRUST come behind HIPAA. So we picked those two based on the different types of regulations they are, as well as the broadness of the pieces that they cover. So I'm not gonna sit and read these slides to you, and really a large portion of really what the webinar focuses on is the end users. And it doesn't necessarily need to be malicious intent on the end user side. Most of the time, it's really a mistake. It says, geez, I was just trying to get my job done in the most efficient way, and there was a mistake made. A personal story for you, my mother-in-law works for a healthcare organization. I won't mention which one, but she works for a healthcare organization, and the lead of HR, the VP of HR in that organization, was contacted by an auditor. And that auditor explained to him that, hey, we're doing an audit on your HIPAA practices. I need for you to send me all of your employees' information. And without confirmation, without back checking or anything else, that HR VP just asked for an email address and sent all of the employees' personal information, social security numbers, health record information, etc., out to this so-called auditor. Unfortunately, it wasn't an auditor. That person was doing a social engineering hack. And now that company is not only paying for credit protection services and all sorts of education to employees now, but they're also putting in additional controls. And you may say, geez, those additional controls, that education should have been there already. Well, HIPAA requires it. They were doing it. The problem is that education kind of wears off. And I am sure, Felix, you've got some personal anecdotes in there as well. If you wouldn't mind sharing one or two, I'm sure you'd enjoy that.
Sure. You know, when I think about compliance or breaches, my mind immediately goes to those that occur within an organization, really born out of no malice, but just an average person trying to do their daily duties, and through some keystroke error or because of a press timeline, sort of just made a mistake. And so, you know, I'm reminded of an instance in which keystroke error added the wrong person to an email line on a payroll file that had not only sensitive information about individual employees, but you know, things related to their compensation, which you generally don't want to have a public conversation about. A valued, you know, tenured employee who had really never made this mistake in the past, but it turned out to be one of those things where we didn't have the right process in place. The person was trying to do the very best thing, hit send to a file, and put in motion a series of actions that you can't take back, right? It's sort of the nail in the fence. You could pull that nail out, but the hole is still there. And so effectively, we spent months trying to sort of undo what was done effectively with one keystroke. And so what you'll hear from me later on is compliance in the context of how we create systems that protect our people, our valued employees that are just trying to work diligently, in addition to what Brady's going to talk about, which is more around what happens on larger scale breaches and how compliance plays a role in that.
Yeah, absolutely. It always it reminds me of, I've gotten emails before, and you get that next email that says so-and-so would like to recall the email they just sent. I'm not sure I've ever clicked on, yep, let them recall that email, right? It usually makes you look even more at that email that they sent, right?
Yeah, so, yeah, it's almost an alert. I should look at it now.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on to the next slide and talking about those end user controls, and you know, training is fantastic. We've talked a little bit about that. When you look at most compliance standards, they do have a training aspect to them, that you've got to train your employees on such a frequency base, and you've got to cover, you know, your security policy and you know, common type things like phishing or those types of things. The unfortunate part is that no matter how much emphasis you put around it, people forget, and it might be that afternoon, it might be the next day, it might be 2 days later that they're just back to doing their jobs, and they're trying to be as efficient as they can and do the best job that they can. You know, in a lot of the businesses that we work in, you know, in Granada included, it's contact centers, it's e-retailing or telehealth, it's, you know, work at home scenarios. And when you're doing your job, a lot of times security is the last thing that you're thinking about. You're thinking about taking care of that customer or taking care of your internal customer. You're thinking about, geez, how can I do this the best and produce the best experience for my customer, whether it's internal or external. And so strong user controls are really, really important. And it's not because we don't trust, it's because we want to allow them to do it without making that fatal mistake, or sending that email, or sending that information out, or saying, geez, hey honey, can you help me with my spreadsheet, right? It's keeping away from those things, and not necessarily limiting, or at the same time trying not to limit their ability to do their jobs. And so when we look at what we're providing, and the way that we looked at our compliance services was to say, hey, can we shift a bunch of that burden and that risk to Dizzion, where we deal with end user controls, and we deal with security and those types of things, and that is our core business. That is what we do. Away from those folks that are in another business or another industry, to help them be able to focus more on their business, and more on providing customer service, or providing health care, or providing financial services. We want to make sure that they've got a good base to stand on. The one thing that I always think about too is that there are lots and lots of providers out there that say they're compliant, and they've got the PCI symbol on their website, or they've got the HIPAA symbol on their website, or high tech or high trust, etc., on their website. And when you start having the conversations with them, and you start to dive deep into what risk they actually take on, typically it's very little, and it's a very small portion that actually applies to you as their customer. And so one of the things that PCI, for instance, has done recently, which I really applaud them for, is they've come out with a different requirement, or an additional requirements for service providers. And one of those requirements is for the service provider to have a responsibilities matrix that they give to their customers as it pertains to PCI compliance. And we've got that, and I love actually providing that to our customers, because it really shows and gives them a kind of a level playing field to compare all service providers to. And I think that's absolutely a great step that they've done there. And so you need to really do that. It's not a checkbox. Just make sure it's not, you don't just say, oh, PCI compliance check, or HIPAA compliance check, or whatever compliance you're trying to meet. Don't use it as a checkbox. Make sure you dive deep down into it. You know, Felix, I got to ask you here too, is when you chose to use Compliance Solutions, how does that help the business? I mean, and that chose to outsource a big portion of that compliance. How does that help your business? And I think that one of the examples when we were preparing for the webinar you gave was around manufacturing, or auto manufacturing. If you wouldn't mind touching base on that, I think that would be fantastic.
Sure. You know, as a small business, when we're thinking about the solutions we provide our customers, compliance and security are really at the forefront, especially in the virtual agent community, that sort of solution. And so you can choose to go a number of routes. You can try to create a level of internal expertise that guides your every step, or you can sort of accept the reality that there are experts that do elements of the work that you need to ensure compliance and security, and partnering with them is in fact probably the best path to take, only because if that's your core expertise, then we're truly leveraging someone that has a bunch of experience and helps us make better decisions. You know, when I think about, as an example, you know, the auto manufacturing industry, and we all buy cars at some point or another, and what's great about the cars is that they come with all these products and features that are cool. They appeal to us, right? Either Bluetooth, or it has, you know, better gas mileage. What's interesting about that is it's not actually the car manufacturer that is the expert in each one of those things. They know enough to know that they're good at a certain subset, and that they source from people that have a greater level of expertise and efficiency that they have. And so effectively as consumers, I mean, we're already accustomed to buying the best, and the best is an amalgamation of the best individual components. And that's really what Granada is about in the context of compliance and security. It's, we have a position and a standard that we know is high, and we look to augment and complement our position by leveraging folks that do this day in and day out. It's one of the beauties of the relationship that we have with Dizzion.
Yeah, thanks a ton for that. And when you gave that example, I immediately went to thinking about how, I think it's Ford that's putting Microsoft inside of their cars now, right? And obviously Ford's not a computer or a software manufacturer, but they're integrating those things to make it a better end user experience and to make a better car.
That's right. And you could say the same when they add, you know, satellite radio, and now many cars come with Wi-Fi. And none of that is proprietary knowledge, but they're recognizing that it adds value and it gives their product, you know, a level of appeal that could not otherwise be present if they didn't leverage with good industry partners.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So moving on to the next slide here a little bit, because, you know, if anyone knows me, I could talk cars for days. So we'll get back on topic a little bit here. But, you know, when we look at the ideal use cases, at least where we've seen our compliance services used, is, you know, it's kind of a broad stretch, whether it's, you know, going to outsourcers. So a lot of our use cases with our customers are because they spin up a bunch of contractors, and so they have outsourced service providers, and they might be temporary workers or for a temporary project, for instance, and they don't want to give them, you know, full rights or full access. They want to be able to control that access. A lot of times we're dealing with companies that are either spinning out other companies or they're acquiring other companies. More so on the acquiring side, and they want to integrate that acquisition very quickly and have the same type of controls and security around those acquired employees as they do around their own employees, and it allows them to do that incredibly quickly. Work at home, which obviously, Felix, you're very, very close to, or remote workers. Scaling is huge as well. A lot of our customers, they have seasonality, so they may take on a bunch more employees during the summer or during the holiday season or Valentine's Day or all sorts of things, and so the quick scaling ability that we have really allows their business to ebb and flow with their costs as well as with their revenue cycles. And then the last one, which I think is probably the most important when we're talking about compliance, is supplementing those in-house compliance people and making sure that one network administrator or that one DBA or whatnot isn't shouldered with 100% of compliance. And that's another thing to point out too, is if any provider comes in and tells you they can make sure you're 100% compliant, with any regulation, I'd turn and run because there is absolutely no possible way that they can make you 100% compliant. There is on your side always going to be some piece of responsibility with compliance. So, all right, I am really excited to turn the floor a whole lot more over to Felix here. So we'll talk a little bit now about how Granada actually uses our compliance solutions, and really more from a competitive advantage as well. So Felix, pass it over to you.
Great. Well, thanks again for having me on today's podcast. Granada Corporation has been around. This will be our 9th year in business. We are a full-scale outsourcer, domestic-based, but our roots started in Latin America with work-at-home agents. And so we are 100% virtual agent environment based 100% on cloud-based infrastructure and solutions. And so we've made a calculated bet that the industry is going to continue to grow in this area, and when we see the rate of ongoing change, we know that as a business, we need to be as flexible and as nimble as possible, and the best way to do that often is, again, by leveraging industry expertise and solutions that are flexible. Now, we're a PCI compliant shop, which means that not only the solutions that we engage, such as the Dizzion platform, is PCI compliant, but as a business, our own internal infrastructure, those elements that we do host and manage are equally PCI compliant, because as Brady indicated, that's sort of table stakes at this point. Where we tend to focus a little bit more is on compliance, because the security component, while nice, tends to be more reactive, where from our perspective, compliance solutions allow you to not make the mistake in the first place or reduce the frequency with which a mistake can be made. And so, a lot of that for us, if you think about our industry, is about ensuring that the agent that's at home has a system that's compliant and that there are security measures there to ensure that we take the guesswork or the potential for them to make a mistake out of the equation. That when we're connecting to our clients, that clients' infrastructure, that we're doing so in a way that minimizes potential risk. Because again, as Brady indicated, there's no 100% compliant or security sort of lockdown solution, but there are high degrees of that compliance. And so when we look at compliance and in the context of the partnership that we have with Dizzion, what we're aiming to do is make sure that when we expand an infrastructure or when we connect to someone's infrastructure, that our method of connectivity is compliant as an overlay to their already compliant solution, but more importantly, that how we transact with the agent that's sitting at home gives our clients a level of comfort beyond what anyone else can offer in the industry. And we feel really bullish about that through our platform that's enabled by Dizzion. So when you're connected at home through Granada via Dizzion, we have a fully encapsulated system, which means that every element of how you interact with the data on your computer is completely locked down and controlled, very deliberate. So you can't copy paste, as you saw in a few slides ago, you can't copy paste or access sites that aren't enabled, so all very profile driven, and that allows us to ensure that the agents aren't going somewhere where they shouldn't be. But in addition to that, we also go above and beyond by ensuring that we can physically monitor the environment that the agent is located in a way that says, do we know who's logged in, right? Is John actually John behind the computer, right? So we can see that visually, and we can then actually monitor their work environment visually so that we know that they're not violating our security protocols. Now this is a step well beyond what the industry has typically employed because of a variety of, older regulations or businesses that have risk profiles that don't allow them to do some of the things that we're doing. But I think the key here is we would never have been able to unlock that solution had it been for the VDI platform that we leverage via Dizzion. And so from a cost perspective, what this allows us to do is to say, instead of making costly investments in large-scale infrastructure that becomes obsolete almost as soon as you put it in place, we go cloud and we stay cloud because it gives us access to the latest and greatest with some of the industry experts at a price point that really can't be beat. And so the competitive edge for us has been a higher degree of security compared to almost anyone in the industry, and a price point that isn't intended to undercut, deliberately take margin hits, as much as it's to say we pay less for a more compliant, more well-rounded solution, and we can pass those savings on to clients. And so part of our competitive advantage is sort of built on those two key elements.
And Felix, how is that resonating with customers? When you go to talk to customers when they're in the so-called prospect stage, how is that resonating with them? Sure.
Well, I mean, listen, we're in an industry that's evolving at a rapid pace. Any brand's needs last year are not identical to their needs this year, and they won't be the same as next year. And so the ability for us to talk about flexible solutions, the ability for us to say we can staff up and we can staff down, and from an infrastructure perspective, you don't have any problems and there's not long lead times, has been phenomenal. That really resonates with clients because we have a standard that is a sort of buy the drink. And so when you need more, you get more, and when you need less, you get less. And that's not only from an agent perspective, but it's also from a technology and infrastructure perspective, and that allows us to remain very competitive from a cost basis. The separate part of that is almost all of our clients have taken a lot of comfort in knowing that we're not trying to master the art of compliance and security on our own. That in fact, we know enough to know that we should get experts involved to help us, and that we can do so in solutions that they could then participate in for their own business. And so these things have really resonated with our clients.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We've hit on it a little bit, is really understanding where you have mastery and where you don't have mastery. And where it makes sense to go hire that mastery and bring it in-house, and where it doesn't. And you know, talking to other companies, they don't want to focus on things that don't help grow their business, and they don't want to invest in things that don't help grow their business. And if they can outsource those pieces that are table stakes, or even those pieces that help give them a competitive advantage, if they can do it and have a better posture and a better story to tell to their customers, and in the end result be more successful, it's much better not to try to grow and breed that talent in-house.
And I think adoption of that sort of standard, what you've described, is increasing in the marketplace. I mean, listen, you could brand yourself as an expert in all things, but the reality is that at the rate of change, many brands recognize that. But that's probably unlikely and unsustainable. When you look at who we serve in the industry compared to just 5 years ago, I mean, people scratch their heads. So the insurance industry, which is a highly regulated, financial services, medical, this is part of our sort of core business today. And just a number of years ago, because of lack of standards, lack of security and compliance standards, and largely as a result of some technology or lack of technology, those verticals would have never been outsourcing to a full work-at-home provider. And today, it's the case that they recognize that it's just as secure, if not even more secure, and it's an advantage for them to be able to keep business onshore, domestic, as opposed to having to go elsewhere for lower costs. So I think it's a win-win for the industry and for those that support the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on a great point there in the fact that not only are our industry's regulations changing, but keeping up with compliance and the change in compliance is a daunting task as well. I think what most folks that are focused on PCI, for instance, PCI is making a huge change from 3.1 to 3.2, which is going to get implemented in 2018, and it's sent a lot of companies scrambling. And so when we did our compliance, we focused on 3.2, and that's what we got audited for is 3.2. And that change is sending a lot of companies into a panic. So great point there as well.
Yeah. Felix, Brady, I think some great discussion here. Just want to jump in and remind people as we look to wrap up, because I do have some questions here that we want to allow just a few minutes to get to. If we've got other questions that people want to lob in, they can do that using their control panel on the right-hand side of their screen. So I'll wait to see those roll in. But in the meantime, I've got a couple here that have been submitted. Brady, one for you. If you could speak a little bit further to some of the key drivers around the growing demand for compliant desktops.
Yeah, I think it touches a little bit on the conversation we were just having, and how industries that weren't regulated or didn't have good compliance wrappers, I guess, or regulations around them are now getting more and more compliance kind of pushed onto them. If you look at HIPAA, for instance, HIPAA's been around since '96, right? I mean, I think I was a baby.
You were just a baby.
I was just a baby, yeah. But the fact that now they're actually putting out fines for it and those types of things, if you look back, it's only 3 or 4 years ago that they really started fining people for that, and they really started tracking breaches with HIPAA and lost laptops and data on stolen computers and those types of things that just now started to proliferate. The other portion is I don't know about everybody else, but catch me on any given day and I might have $2 actual cash in my pocket, right? So I'm using a card for everything. My debit card is my cash now. So, and you're kind of hard pressed to find a business that doesn't take credit cards or debit cards. So that PCI regulation, or that PCI kind of burden, so to speak, is proliferating further and further and further as well. So I think it's both new regulations, and I think it's the kind of the sprawl or the spread of those regulations and how many people they touch.
Okay, I've got one here that looks like it's for you, Felix, and the question is around your IT team. You know, I think the question is asking here, do you feel like you need a large IT team to be able to manage this remote workforce that you have? And obviously, as we've discussed today, doing that within an environment that is secure and compliant. So if you could say a little bit about, your IT team internally and how big that team is and their core competencies and how you think about that.
Sure. I mean, quite the contrary. I mean, the goal is to have a level of expertise. The goal is to have a strategy that allows you to have systems in place that are, effectively low maintenance, low management. And so we operate a fairly nimble IT staff by comparison. I've been in the industry for a number of years and have seen very large IT organizations. The bulk of what my IT shop does is around creating new product sets and features for our customers internally. So it's more around system development because we're leveraging folks like Dizzion and one or two other partners that offer, end-to-end solutions. Not a lot of involved in managing those systems. Now, at an agent level, it's more around education. And so when you find the right agent that understands how to manage their own system, their technical problems are largely sort of remediated through FAQs, fact guides that you give. But we have a very nimble shop, and I think we probably do more in IT around contract management, right, with our partners to ensure that things like SLAs and business reviews are completed than actual IT maintenance and management. Again, it's the beauty of cloud-based as opposed to physical-based, infrastructures that you have to manage and that are very costly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, I've got another question for you, Felix. It's a follow-up to offering compliance services. This question is asking, how much of that decision was driven by customer demand? I think the follow-up here is, do you feel like your end customers are getting more educated and more intelligent around compliance standards, and are you seeing that in the customer negotiation process or the prospecting process when you're trying to acquire new end customers?
Sure. I think the bottom line is that compliance and security are table stakes. And so you could only ever have a conversation with a prospective client if upon their discovery or review of your solution, you're deemed to be sort of compliant at the level of, at the standard that they expect. So I think that today and age, all brand sensitive clients, know quite a bit. I mean, we've all seen the horror stories related to, Target breaches, a few years ago in a number of other industries. And so I think all clients are fairly informed in this particular area. I think what they're generally looking for isn't whether you have a compliant solution today. It's to better understand a bit of the trajectory. So have you been compliant and have you been able to evolve from a compliance perspective? Therefore, do you have a system that continues to evolve, with the industry? And I think that this is one of the beauties of, again, not only cloud, but leveraging sort of deep sector partners and experts, because if we were managing this internally today, our knowledge would be good as of today. But tomorrow and the next day, there's an effort to stay up to speed. And as an example, Dizzion helps reduce that learning curve because you're already involved in this day in, day out across your customer base, and you bring that information to us. So there's a bit of a balancing act, but I think generally speaking, clients are smarter, and we have a solution that continues to evolve, which is great.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes perfect sense. And I think if there's one sort of golden thread that I've heard running through everything that you both have shared today, it is definitely a theme around business agility and being able to, evolve, adapt, and really to meet your customers' needs, especially in these highly regulated spaces, staying 2 to 3 steps out in front of what they expect and what they need today, and showing that expertise and forward thinking well into the future. So that's going to wrap it up for the questions that we had. Again, really want to thank both Felix and Brady, our panelists, for the great discussion here today. As a reminder to our attendees, we will be sharing the finalized webinar presentation to you so you can share that with your peers. Please do certainly follow up with us if you've got additional questions for either the Dizzion team or the Granada team. We're happy to filter those to our experts and get you some more details if there's anything you're particularly interested in. Again, everyone, thanks so much for joining today and hope you have a great Thursday and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.